Hi, this is Aaron, and this is Seek Media Productions giving you a ranking review. So, in this particular video, I want to discuss a video game franchise that at this time is probably one of my favorite in video games that I've been playing for quite some time, and that revolves around the God of War series. At first, when it came to the God of War franchise, I was a little hesitant. And the main reason was because I'm a fan of all kinds of mythology. I'm a huge nerd when it comes to talking about gods from different particular aspects of pantheons and around the world. And for me, when you're talking about anything that has to deal with anybody's religious concepts or deities, it's always a little hesitant at first when you deal with the concepts of these things being fought against, or you take it in the rings and if not just fighting a god, but literally ending quite a few of them. So when God of War came on the scene, there was a lot of mixed emotions. But as soon as I got to actually play with the story of Kratos and in the Greco-Roman world and his vengeance against the gods, I was definitely hooked. I just can't say that when it comes to God of War, it definitely hits that niche for me, or at least that that aspect for me that I truly appreciate as both a gamer and a fan of mythology. So in this particular video, I want to take the time to really delve deep into that as towards my particular views on the franchise and where I think certain games rank above or lower than others. And it's especially interesting considering that at this point Santa Monica is literally thinking about, or at least in the production of creating a reboot to the very first game that started them all, which for me, whenever a studio decides to revamp a game or reboot it, or not necessarily reboot, but go revisit it and send it out again for us to actually play it in better light, gives me a chance to fall in love with the franchise all over again. So I'm really hyped for when that comes out. And then not too far from that, it appears that Amazon is going to be coming out here with their own take on it by bringing it into the series in the live action sense. Fingers crossed that actually turns out to be something that's really good. At this time of day, we are seeing a resurgence in studios actually taking note on video games, and I mean we have Mario, and then we have Minecraft and so many others, even Mortal Kombat's back and back in the mix. And it seems that at this point, as superhero games or superhero comic book movies are basically starting to dwindle down a little bit as far as the attention is concerned, and video games are now stepping into the platform. It's dealer's choice as to what's actually going to actually stay in this, at the top pedestal. But for right now, let's go deep into God of War and with this ranking video. With this particular ranking video, we also got I want you all to keep in mind that we're only going to be really talking about the main entries in the main 5 entries for the God of War franchise. We're not talking about the spin-off, so you're not going to see anything about the Sons of Sparta, Ascension, or Ghosts. We're not going to talk about those. One, and I'm just going to be blatantly honest and transparent with you guys. I didn't play those side games. There's nothing against them. I think they actually look cool, but at the time I was really only interested in just the main series. So we're talking about from God of War to God of War 2, 3, and of course the Norse mythologies, dealing with the reboot of God of War, well, not reboot, but the re-entry of God of War in the Norse pantheon, and of course God of War Ragnarok. So we're only going to be talking about these ones and where they particularly rank. First one down on the chopping block happens to be the very first game of the entries of this series, God of War. This is the time where we actually really got to delve deep into the gameplay mechanics and the story that was that we were following with the Ghost of Sparta, known as Kratos. In this particular game, you are charged by the goddess Athena to locate Pandora's box in order to gain the powers enough to to basically go out and take down the god of war known as Ares. And throughout this journey of him trying to acquire these abilities to be able to tackle on that enormous threat as he's destroying Athens, you find out that Kratos has history with Ares, and in this sense, he was a follower of him. And in his following and worship of Ares, he ended up getting tricked by this god into killing his family, which resulted in him becoming the ghost of Sparta and falling in on this, rage-filled quest for vengeance. Eventually, down the line, Kratos succeeds, and he ends up killing Ares and assimilating his role as the new god of war. This game gave us a lot of quick time events, and the action in it was awesome. Again, taking down a lot of Greco-Roman creatures and following the mythology of Kratos as he goes in this Greco-Roman world of creatures and monsters and gods was super cool. We also had other interesting game mechanics like little mini games, and if you know what I'm talking about, we really know where we're going in with that. And it was interesting, to say the least. But again, I loved the way that he was able to move around with Kratos, especially with the Blades of Chaos and just taking out all these unique enemies, classes, and it was definitely an enjoyable time for me. Now, the next one on this list actually is a game that I definitely did review on this channel, and that is God of War Ragnarok. At the time, I was, swept up with my feelings of it. It was, again, the conclusion to a story that I felt that Santa Monica was really invested in, and in a lot of ways definitely delivered. But as time moves on, feelings change, and I had a little bit more time to actually sit back and really digest everything that I felt when experiencing God of War Ragnarok. So that's why at this point is a little way lower on the list than I would have necessarily had it at when I first reviewed it. And as its entry into Norse mythology, it was still pretty much a lot of stuff that I definitely did enjoy. Again, I'm a huge fan of mythologies, and especially when it comes to Norse mythology. But when it comes to God of War Ragnarok, I just feel as though that game never truly lived up to the hype that they were basically trying to promise to us. Kratos on his journey with his son Atreus, and with the various other guys like Odin and Heimdall and everyone else. Yes, you get to go into this warlike setting, but it's so much reserved from what honestly it should honestly be. And I feel as though certain character developments, like the developments that you get with Freya and various other characters, I just don't feel as though it was given the same breath that it honestly should have received, especially when you get such an awesome epic conclusion that you did in the original Greco-Roman side of things. I feel as though when it came down to Norse mythology, they kind of lessened it to an extent that I feel as though they definitely should never have been. And then when you look at what they did with the entry that came before it, it was definitely some letdowns in that department. Still, there was I liked the entry of the inclusion of a lot more boss-like character you was able to tackle on, but bringing in more enemies doesn't necessarily qualify from you actually understanding the differences between each one and then revving up the action you should go hard in that sense. Now, with God of War 2, it had a lot to live up to as far as what its predecessor had offered. I definitely still love God of War 2. I feel as though the story of Kratos actually being introduced in his reign of terror as God of War and having to be knocked down quite a few pegs from the Lord God High of Zeus, and then having to try and build back up his strength to try and go back and attack the guys for their treachery is interesting. But I feel as though this entry, there was a few problems with it as far as the development scheme is in my perspective. Certain levels I feel as though just didn't necessarily live up to the same hypes as they were in the first God of War, and then also when it comes down to certain enemy types, I feel as though even though we're still inside the Greco-Roman area, I feel as though some of them just felt like kind of wash and repeat in certain respects. But still a very enjoyable entry. I love the story really that was being told here in Kratos going back into his vengeance and his dealings with the Titans as his squad that he was basically leading on to get his revenge. It was really interesting, and it definitely was the game that made me solidify and saying I'm going to continue on with this franchise. Now, when it comes to God of War PS4, again, it was a revamp into the God of War franchise. This is where things really switch from the original kind of gameplay that you got from the first one into this over-the-shoulder new aspects of gameplay that was introduced into the series. And it also introduced to us Kratos, who was far more reserved and a little bit more, definitely a lot more different from his original presentation. He's no longer just this angry individual who's just seeking revenge at any cost. This is a father who has to grow into his role as not just a provider, but a teacher to his own son, being Atreus, in his unique journey and becoming who he is going to eventually become. That father-son duo that you get in this game is something. Is basically some of the most enjoyable times that I had as a gamer ever. The journey that these two go on is just unreal. And again, going from the Greco-Roman world into the Norse mythology world is awesome. I really enjoyed the differences between the two, but at the end of the day, it all felt cohesive to what you were given into the God of War franchise. It didn't go too far to one direction that you felt that this was just a completely different game. It still felt very reminiscent to what you originally were aware of, but just with the new touches and differences that make it a breath of fresh air for the franchise. But I also gotta say this: whenever a franchise decides to create a new entry and then does the whole we're just going to use the original name of the franchise to start over, I never really liked that, but I guess it makes sense for this particular case. I really loved all the voice actors who gave their voices towards it, especially for Brock and Sindri, for the dwarves, Freya. I really enjoyed her storyline, especially when it's go forward down the road. And I also really enjoyed some of the combat differences too. I just wish that in this particular one, again, certain depiction, at least when it comes to certain gods, I really wish they would have gave us just as much reverence as they did for the Greco-Roman gods, because I've always felt that these ones just felt way more depowered compared to what they were in the Greco-Roman world. And I felt so that's just not cool when you do that. You treat one pantheon on this pedestal compared to the others. But it is what it was. Again, I really enjoyed God of War for the PS4, and again, it made me really hungry for even more of the franchise. With God of War 3, it had the insurmountable task of concluding Kratos' journey from what we originally thought was going to be his end. And I feel as though in this game, still, compared to all the other entries, it not only completed the task it was supposed to do, but it went above and beyond in so many different ways. It included incredible story that felt as epic as ever. I'm still gushing over certain boss fights with Kratos, not only against Kratos and Zeus, but Kratos against Hades, and Kratos against his own brother being Heracles, and it's incredible. The very first boss fight showed you just how epic and how engaged this game was going to be with Poseidon. The scale is incredible, and I feel as though if we can get back to a sheer scale from what we got in God of War 3 and interwoven that into other entries down the road, we will be eating well as far as fans are concerned. But again, with God of War 3, this was definitely the high point. I feel as though it should be on anybody's list, because this delivered on so many promises and then some. And it felt as though if they truly did not go forward with another entry in the series, I would have been just happy with where it ended right here. But it didn't. We got God of War for PS4, and then God of War Ragnarok. But those two games still have to look at this one as being the pinnacle for what God of War gives us in this franchise to date. And overall, that's my list. Where do y'all find with the God of War franchise? Which ones are your favorites? Definitely, come at me and let's engage on where everything's going to fall. But for the majority of it, I'm looking forward to this franchise. I can't wait to see what's next for Kratos on this journey. Some say it's going to be in the Egyptian area, but then we also got the introduction to all the vast various others with the Shinto realm and so many others. I'm really interested to see. But let's discuss where things is going to go. And also, please like, share, and subscribe if you like this video. And hit us up on our other platforms, being Letterboxd, Threads, and Instagram. We engage on all of those platforms as cool as this one. And we just wanted to see how much more we can actually give to y'all. But again, this is it.